I'm Jane Maber. I'm the head of brand at the Stroke Association. And when I came into this role, probably about 3.5 years ago, I came in as a brand manager, marketer, and my role was really about streamlining our brand and hopefully catapulting us onto the stage with a brilliant campaign at the end of that. What I wasn't expecting was having to put a completely different hat on at times and learning lots about disciplines that you might associate more with perhaps HR, people management, and definitely delving into sort of human psychology at certain points. And I think that's kind of really true of us as brand marketers. Often we're so focused, as we should be, on our audiences and our customers. Sometimes we forget to look back inwards and actually remember that our people in our organisation are a really key audience for us. So today I'm just going to talk you through really our journey at the Stroke Association and how we have kind of brought our people along with us as we've been embedding our new brand. And before I start with that, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the Stroke Association in case you don't know already. But stroke is a condition, I'm sure you've probably all heard of it. What you might not know is that it actually happens every 5 minutes in the UK, somebody has a stroke. So it really is very prevalent, and it's a very sudden and instant change to somebody's life. It really does turn life upside down. What a lot of people also don't know is that the brain is an amazing organ and you can make a recovery, you can make new connections in your brain, you can adapt to a new life after stroke. And that's really what the Stroke Association is here to do. We are the only UK-wide charity supporting people to rebuild their lives after stroke. And we do that through direct support services. We also campaign and try and make a difference in terms of the care that people are getting through all of our health systems. And we also fund really critical research as well. So despite that scale and impact of stroke being really up here, we faced these challenges when I first came into the role. Our awareness was really at rock bottom. Our spontaneous awareness of zero, our prompted awareness, so people having heard of us as a charity, was in long-term decline. And our share of voice really was decreasing in the charity market as well. While other people were increasing their ad spend, ours was just going down. So ultimately, stroke and the Stroke Association weren't front of mind for people. And we really needed to change that. We'd also seen a plateau in our income, which, as you all know, is really key to us being able to deliver our charitable mission. So we had to do something. We clearly had a job to do in terms of investing in advertising and getting out there and getting the reach. But we also had a job to do in terms of refreshing our whole brand. We had a very disjointed brand strategy and that was quite frankly confusing at times. We had lots of people saying different things and nothing was really sticking. So we had a job to do first in terms of refreshing our brand strategy. To be honest, we really had to go back to the beginning with that. And from there, using that as a foundation to refresh our visual identity and also our tone of voice. And so we spent a lot of time doing this, speaking to all of our audiences, both warm and cold, also talking to our people internally as well. And we ended up with something a bit like this. So our new purpose, which is around rebuilding lives after stroke, and our 4 new values, which are there. We are human, we believe in better, we say it how it is, and we give our all. And that's all packaged up into our personality and our little man there of being a life champion. So one of the most heartbreaking things I think I've ever heard a stroke survivor say is that, you know, the moment when they kind of came out of their coma or they came round from their ordeal was wishing that they'd actually died and instead of being alive. And we hear that quite a lot. And actually the Stroke Association is here to say, like, you can adapt to a new life after stroke. So we're very much champions for life. And from that, using that as a foundation, we also refreshed our visual identity and tone of voice with that. Now, I'm sure you've all seen this brand iceberg before, and I'm sure you've probably used it in presentations yourself. But as we were working on that brand strategy, it became incredibly apparent that we had yet another challenge, in the way that brand was viewed in our organisation and had been viewed for a very long time. So while I think we all in this room understand that, yes, the visuals are really important, yes, the tone of voice is, there's a load of stuff below the waterline which is all about customer experience and how people experience your brand that make up the whole thing. our people were very much above the waterline. So it's all about pretty colours, the logo. And ironically, those are the people in our organisation that were delivering our brand to our people by delivering services, by trying to sign people up to fundraising events, by running these events. So we really needed to kind of embed this new personality and values within our culture and give people tangible tools to be able to understand how to deliver that through their day-to-day work. So it was a huge ship to turn. Ultimately, we were going from, you know, it just being a brand thing, a brand team thing, and it just all being about visuals, moving through to it being something that we all owned and were all responsible for. And with that, the recognition that there's new skills and capabilities that we had to build into our people, and that there were quite quickly shifting expectations of our people. So they had been going on their merry way with this story of brand for quite a long time, and all of a sudden we were kind of moving the goalposts. So we really needed them to understand why we were doing this refresh in the first place, why brand was so important, and their role in how they can actually deliver that experience so that we had a consistent experience across the piece. So, a bit of theory. You may have seen this before. It's a change curve. It's basically the psychological response to change. And this actually really helped us shape our approach as we were going through this. So essentially it's, you know, the initial shock and then kind of denial about what's going on, and then people tend to slump into a bit of a depression about it, and then eventually they'll come out the other side. And I think two really important things that we kind of acknowledge during this is everybody is different and everybody has different personality preferences. So some people will skip all the way through that really quite quickly. They might even just jump right to the other side, which is brilliant. Other people may go through it much slower. And people have different needs within that. So, you know, some people want loads of detail and understand all the data behind your decision. Some people just want the big picture aims and everything in between. The other thing is that resistance to change normally comes from a place of loss or perceived loss or potential loss. So in our case, it was a loss of the status quo and the fact that it had been one way. Our brand hadn't been touched for 4 years, and even 4 years ago, I don't think so much emphasis had been put on the values and what that means for our customer experience. So people had been working in a certain way for a very long time, and that loss then causes anxiety because people think, is there going to be more work for me? They also become very aware that they're kind of incompetent at something because it's all these new terms, all these new ideas that are suddenly being bandied around. So there's lots of anxiety around it. And I think understanding those points really helped us to frame then our engagement strategy with our people internally. Because there are things you can do, and here there are a few notes on how you can kind of mitigate these responses. But essentially at the beginning, it's all about communication and trying to minimize that shock and just empathizing, I think, with that denial, listening, a lot of listening, making people feel like they're heard. And as they kind of go through that depression part, it's, well, as I said, the empathizing at the beginning, but then starting to drip feed capability building activities so that people actually start to learn, they start to grow in confidence, add in a bit of celebration and encouragement, and suddenly people will start coming out of the other side. And so our approach really was based on that, and we kind of had a top-down and a bottom-up view of things. So top down was stuff coming really from the organisation, and bottom up was trying to drive the change from within the organisation and having those things working together. So the top down is kind of very traditional internal comms activities, but just making sure we were communicating through them regularly and consistently as well. So all the principles of the communications that we wanted to do with our brand externally to our audiences was exactly the same for our internal audience, which was our people. So we were looking at things like our intranet articles, e-newsletter that went out every week, joining team meetings and producing information like FAQs about the refresh and the campaign that subsequently came along. and producing like a one-pager with all the key facts all together that you could look at a glance. That was really all about the minimising shock. So drip feeding information, so it slowly built up, but it was very irregular and people started talking about it. But you're also able to give more details for the people that want that, and always giving a feedback mechanism so you could show that you were listening right from the beginning. And then we had a huge training program that came off the back of that with our staff. Again, some traditional training programs because that's what people like, and then other more fluid and flexible things like having drop-in sessions for people to come along and share some work, where you've got people that are more proactive as well with the change. That's really good because they can kind of sow the seed for others and bringing along work that they might want feedback on or things like that. And by the time we got to running the campaign, we had a huge celebration launch event. It did take quite a lot of resource, but it was really worth it. We had our offices that are across the country linked up on Skype in a Eurovision style session, but you know there was actual cheering, and yeah, it really did make everyone feel very united. So you get to that celebration point, and then you're really pushing people up that curve to moving on and being really excited about what's going on. And then at the same time, the bottom-up activities, I'm going to talk about a brand activation group in a minute. Essentially, it's a champion scheme, which I'm sure you've all heard of and maybe have even tried in various different places. But again, that's more trying to drive the change internally. And you've got that transference of ownership starting to happen there with a smaller group of people. But it's also the opportunity to make sure you're listening to your people and training them up as well, perhaps in smaller groups, to then pass on learning from that. And we also had a recognition card scheme, which was a bit of a celebration scheme, but also to reinforce messages where people could actually give feedback to each other saying, you know, I really saw you being human in that meeting we were in because you did X, Y, Z. So it makes people feel good, but it's also reinforcing behaviour. So just thinking about the top-down engagement activities that we did, I guess these are just a few tips really that we learned along the way. Identifying and mapping your stakeholders, I can't emphasize how much this was like key to our success. I think it can seem like a really laborious and kind of time-consuming activity, but it really, really was worth it. And I'll talk through a couple of techniques that we use in a second, but kind of really knowing who you're trying to engage and who the influential people are in your organisation is really, really important. Also, knowing your own limitations. So yes, this was a brand project. Yes, we were rolling out our baby, essentially, that we had been working on for so long. But we weren't experts in every single element of the things that I've just talked you through. So, for example, we brought on our learning and development team on board to help us with the training. We brought in our internal engagement and comms team because they knew our people better than anybody else. For this to work, you need all your activities to be as credible and high quality as possible, and there's no way that you can do that on your own. So bringing in expertise, it's also a brilliant influencing mechanism because you've then got those teams on board right from the word go. Making sure your project leaders are really accessible, so you know, always giving contact details and making sure that, you know, if you're leading the project, that you are presenting in places and people can see you and that people feel like they can speak to you is really important. And the last one, maybe it's obvious, I don't know, but calling out any elephants in the room was really key, I think, as well, to kind of connecting with our audience. So where you know the questions that are going to come, you know the things that people are thinking, is just saying it and showing that you understand that it's uncomfortable. So particularly for us at the beginning, it would have been about the money. So why are you spending so much money on rebranding when we could be spending it on services? Is actually calling that out straight away. It's uncomfortable, but we have to do it, and then explaining why. And that really, really went a long way with bringing people on board. Actually, if there's just one thing that you take from this, I would hope it would be that, because it really made a difference. So just a bit on stakeholder mapping. There's loads of different tools out there, but these are the ones that we used and we found them really useful. Obviously, stakeholders are people that can influence your activity, are involved in it, or will be affected by it. So listing them all out is the first job. And then understanding where you need them to be. So the first grid on the right-hand side is just really mapping their journey. So X is where they are now. The O is where you want them to be. You know, are they obstructing the process? Are they going to let the change happen? Or do you need to move them so that they're actually helping you make it happen? And not everyone will be the same. And then you're probably going to end up with quite a long list because brand involves everybody. So you need to prioritize your stakeholders. Often, I think that will be pretty instinctive. You'll know who is the most influential, who you really need to get on board. But there are other tools that can help you to do that as well. So the two grids below are kind of mapping techniques again on kind of axes, either in terms of influence and interest, so how powerful someone is in the organisation versus how much interest they have in what you're doing, or there's the other version about level of agreement and level of trust with you, are interesting ways to see how important you think they are in terms of your levels of priority. And then it's really important to make sure that people are leading on different stakeholders and who is looking after each of them, and who, if you have teams in your stakeholder list, which you might do, is knowing the influential people to target within those teams to get them all on board. And so moving back to the bottom-up changes then, trying to make the change happen from within while you're doing all the communication from the top down. We really capitalise on the idea of viral change for this. So we all, again, as marketers, you know what viral means. You know when, a social media video goes viral. It's exactly the same thing with a change. There's always a tipping point where if you get enough people on your side, everyone else will follow quite quickly. And in the simplest form, it's also about just breaking your task down. I'm sure a lot of you work in organisations that are far bigger than the Stroke Association. It can feel like a huge wall of people that you've suddenly got to convince of something completely different. So we started with a smaller group, and that is the brand activation group that I mentioned earlier. So we started with this idea, which was essentially the brand team. We were then going to kind of sell that into the brand activation group, who hopefully were quite influential and had networks within the organisation to spread it even further. And so it's quite interesting, I think, thinking about our brand activation group and this idea of brand champions, essentially. Certainly in the charity sector, it's a concept that comes up time and time again. I'm not so sure about other organisations, but it's not normally that successful. So there's normally quite a lot of problems with it for various reasons. And ours has actually been going quite well, I'm pleased to say. And I think essentially what we've done is picked reps that are from all around the country, all different teams represented. We've been quite specific in who we've picked, so making sure that people are influential, they're credible, they're quite confident, and that they're able to pass on messages and spread the word, which is essentially what you want them to do. And they do that, really. They get privileged information from us that the rest of the organisation aren't getting, and they share that with their teams. They also bring feedback back to us as well, which is hugely helpful. So because of that, you get a quicker and more sustainable change, and we get better engagement, basically. But we also get direct feedback from the front line, which then feeds into us kind of communicating and giving information in a more useful way to everyone, which feeds the change as well. So, as I said, often it's not successful. I think ours is going from strength to strength, and I think these 4 reasons are kind of really key to that. First of all, thinking about who in your team is going to run this. You need an inspirational leader. We've all been in that situation where we've been in teams where someone is really motivational, inspirational, and they get the best out of their teams. This is exactly the same sort of thing. So you do need someone that's quite confident in that role. The champions or your brand activation group really need to have a purpose. And in this case, it's quite easy because we got them hooked on the brand purpose, and it was all about that. And once we managed to convince them that that was why we existed as an organisation and this is what we needed to spread, it was quite simple then to move them forward because they were driven by that. Showing them appreciation is really key. we just made them feel special. So we told them that they were handpicked. We told them that they were getting privileged information. So they knew things before everybody else in the organisation, and they quite liked that. Other simple things, like when we had face-to-face meetings, paying for their travel. Again, anybody in the room that works for a charity will know, like, the budgetary situations and who's paying for what. You know, we're under a lot of scrutiny, and it is always tight. So just the fact that we said we'd pay for their travel and that we'd give them lunch was actually quite a big deal. And obviously you can translate that into other organisations and what matters to people there. But it really worked for us. And also them getting something a bit extra out of it too. So not only did they get special brand training, and these are non-comms discipline people, they also got training around having difficult conversations, managing feedback, giving feedback, all of that kind of extra stuff that we were expecting them to do. Because of course we also wanted them to challenge people when they saw things that weren't working quite the way we wanted them to. So in terms of the impact then, it is early days. We switched over to our new brand in March, and it's still an ongoing rolling process. It's also quite a hard thing to measure, so I'd be really interested to hear if anybody else has any thoughts on this, perhaps in a minute. But we have seen some really proactive people that we weren't necessarily expecting to come on board quite proactively, as I've just said. So people that were in non-comms teams, perhaps our service teams, suddenly realising that they need to rewrite all of their service letters that they send out to their clients because they're not in the right tone of voice. And that was like, I don't think any of us anticipated that that would happen so quickly, but it did, and it's amazing. That's transformed that experience for those stroke survivors who are using our service in that area. We've definitely had more requests for support from the brand team, so people are thinking about it a lot more in the context of what they're doing. And it's really increased my team's capacity, because now we have the brand activation group. They are growing in confidence and they are taking on more responsibility. As we launched our campaign, they were briefing their own teams about what was happening, when, what we needed of people. So we have seen a real change in behaviour in that respect. And there's a few quotes there just from some feedback exercise that we did. But as I said at the beginning, this has all been in service to the campaign that I mentioned, and we launched that in April, and it's running again now. It was so important for us as an organisation to get our ducks in a row, and for us to be delivering this new brand experience as far as we could be, so that by the time this ad went out, we weren't saying and doing completely different things. And we have been overwhelmed with the response from the stroke community in terms of how our ad has resonated with them. But in terms of our 5-year KPIs that we've been looking at, we've seen some really exciting results. So particularly in terms of awareness and also likelihood to support, those are both significant increases after one 8-week campaign so far. And I strongly believe, although I can't prove it, but I do strongly believe that if we hadn't have put in the groundwork with our people and brought them along with us so that they are reinforcing our messages at every opportunity, we wouldn't have seen this level of jump in our stats. And yeah, just really hoping that it continues as the campaign does. But I'll just leave you with this last lovely quote from someone as part of our feedback exercise of what all the internal engagement has kind of meant to them. And yeah, happy to take questions or thoughts from anybody if you have any. Thank you.